The morning sun painted the dusty streets of Cedar Creek with golden light, but for Grace, it felt like just another day of whispered comments and sideways glances. She pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she walked toward the general store, her footsteps echoing softly against the wooden planks of the sidewalk. At 23, Grace had learned to keep her eyes down when she passed groups of townspeople. It was easier that way. Easier than seeing their expressions change when they noticed her, easier than hearing their voices drop to hushed tones as she walked by. "Poor thing," Mrs. Henderson whispered to her friend as Grace passed the post office. "Plain as yesterday's. Bread and twice as stale." Grace's cheeks burned, but she kept walking. She had heard it all before. The women of Cedar Creek had made it their daily entertainment to discuss her appearance, her prospects, and her future. Or rather, her lack thereof. The general store stood at the corner of Main Street, its painted sign reading Matthew's General Store in faded letters. Her father had built this place with his own hands 20 years ago, back when Grace's mother was still alive and laughter filled their small home behind the shop. Grace pushed open the heavy wooden door, the familiar creak greeting her like an old friend. The store smelled of leather, coffee beans, and the lavender soap she kept behind the counter. It was her sanctuary, the one place where she felt truly useful. "Morning, Papa," she called softly to the man sitting in the rocking chair by the window. Thomas Matthews looked up from his newspaper, his weathered face breaking into a gentle smile. "Morning, my dear. How are you feeling today?" Grace studied her father's pale complexion with worried eyes. The cough that had started as a minor annoyance last winter had grown worse with each passing month. Dr. Wilson had been by twice this week already, and each visit left deeper lines of concern etched across her father's forehead. "I'm fine, Papa. You should be resting upstairs instead of sitting down here." Thomas waved his hand dismissively. "This old store needs watching, and you can't do everything yourself." But Grace was already doing everything herself. She managed the inventory, served customers, balanced the books, and stayed up late into the night trying to make sense of the mounting bills that seemed to multiply like weeds after rain. The first customer of the day was Mrs. Porter, a stern woman who always found something to complain about. She examined every item as if looking for flaws, her lips pursed in permanent disapproval. "This fabric feels rough," Mrs. Porter announced, running her fingers over a bolt of cotton. "I suppose it will have to do, though I doubt it will last." "Long," Grace nodded politely and wrapped the fabric, her hand steady despite the criticism. She had learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. It was better to stay quiet, complete the sale, and hope the customer would leave quickly. After Mrs. Porter departed with her package and a final disapproving look, Grace returned to organizing the shelves. Each jar, each tool, each bottle had its place. Order was something she could control, even when everything else in her life felt chaotic. The bell above the door chimed again, and Grace looked up to see young Billy Watson bouncing in with his usual energy. At 8 years old, Billy was one of the few people in town who treated Grace with genuine kindness. "Miss Grace, Miss Grace. My mama sent me for sugar, but I also wanted to ask if you got any new books in." Grace smiled, her first real smile of the day. "I might have something you'd like, Billy. Let me check in the back." She retrieved a worn copy of Adventure Stories that had arrived with the last supply wagon. Billy's eyes lit up as she handed it to him. "How much for this one?" "Consider it a loan," Grace said, ruffling his hair. "Just bring it back when you're done, and we'll find you another one." Billy hugged the book to his chest and ran out, calling his thanks over his shoulder. Grace watched him go, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun streaming through the windows. These small moments of connection kept her going. Not everyone in Cedar Creek was cruel. Some, like Billy and her father, saw something worthwhile in her. But as the days passed, it became harder to remember those bright spots when the darker voices seemed so much louder. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, each interaction a careful dance of politeness and efficiency. Grace had perfected the art of being helpful without being memorable, useful without being noticed. Old Mr. Jenkins needed nails for his fence repair. The Murphy family required supplies for their new baby. Mrs. Watson stopped by for thread and spent 10 minutes, telling Grace about Billy's progress with his reading. "That boy just loves those books you keep lending him," Mrs. Watson said with genuine appreciation. "You have a gift for knowing what people need." Grace felt a flush of pride at the compliment. She did pay attention to her customers' preferences, their needs, their stories. It was one of the few ways she felt truly valuable. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the store floor, Grace helped her father upstairs to their small living quarters. The climb tired him more than it used to, and she noticed how his breathing had become more labored. "Papa, maybe we should have Dr. Wilson come by again tomorrow." Thomas patted her hand gently. "Don't worry so much, my dear. I'm just tired. A good night's rest will help." But Grace knew it was more than tiredness. The medical bills were already straining their finances, and she had been putting off ordering new inventory to pay for her father's treatments. The store that had once been their pride was slowly becoming a burden they might not be able to carry much longer. Late that night, Grace sat at the small desk in the corner of the store, working by lamplight as she tried to balance the books. The numbers told a story she didn't want to read. Income down, expenses up, and a stack of overdue notices from suppliers growing thicker each week. She pulled out the letter from the bank that had arrived yesterday, the one she hadn't had the courage to open yet. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper and read the formal language that essentially meant they were running out of time. The mortgage payment was 3 months behind. The bank was demanding immediate payment or they would begin foreclosure proceedings. Grace stared at the numbers, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Outside, the town was quiet except for the occasional sound of footsteps on the wooden sidewalks. Cedar Creek slept peacefully. Unaware that one of its oldest businesses was slowly dying, Grace looked around the store that had been her whole world for as long as she could remember. Every shelf, every corner, every creaking floorboard held memories of her childhood, her mother's laughter, her father's pride in building something lasting. The thought of losing it all made her chest tight with panic. Where would they go? What would they do? Her father was too sick to start over, and she had no skills beyond running this store. As she finally blew out the lamp and made her way upstairs, Grace caught her reflection in the dark window. The face that looked back at her was tired, worried, and yes, plain just as everyone always said. But in that moment she saw something else too. She saw someone who had been fighting alone for too long, someone who had forgotten that strength didn't always come from within. Sometimes, she thought as she climbed the stairs to check on her sleeping father, strength came from the most unexpected places. She just had to be brave enough to recognize it when it arrived. The sound of hoofbeats on the dusty road caught Grace's attention as she swept the front porch of the store. She looked up to see a lone rider approaching Cedar Creek, his horse moving with a slight limp that spoke of long miles traveled. The man sat tall in his saddle despite the obvious fatigue, his weathered hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. Most strangers who passed through Cedar Creek were just that, strangers who bought supplies and moved on without a second thought. But something about this rider made Grace pause in her sweeping. Maybe it was the careful way he guided his injured horse, or the patient manner in which he dismounted and examined the animal's front leg. The cowboy was tall and lean, with the kind of sun-weathered skin that came from years of outdoor work. His clothes were dusty from travel but well-maintained, and when he finally looked up from his horse, Grace was struck by eyes that seemed to hold both kindness and deep experience. "Afternoon, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat politely. "Name's Cole Sullivan. I'm wondering if you might know where I could find a stable for my horse here. She's picked up a stone bruise, and I don't want to push her any further today." Grace found herself momentarily speechless. It had been so long since a stranger had addressed her with such courtesy that she almost forgot how to respond. "There's a stable just down the street," she managed, pointing toward the end of the main road. "Mr. Peterson runs it. He's good with horses." Cole nodded his thanks and began leading his horse in the direction she had indicated. Grace watched him go, noting the gentle way he spoke to the animal and the consideration he showed for its comfort. Most men who rode through town were in such a hurry they would have pushed their horses to the limit, but this stranger clearly put his animals' welfare first. Later that afternoon, Cole returned to the store on foot. The bell above the door chimed. As he entered, and Grace looked up from the inventory ledger she had been struggling with all day. "Mr. Peterson says my horse needs at least 2 days of rest," Cole explained, removing his hat as he spoke. "I was hoping you might have some supplies I could use while I'm waiting." Grace nodded and moved to help him gather what he needed. As she collected items from the shelves, she found herself stealing glances at this unexpected visitor. Unlike the other men who came into the store, Cole seemed to actually see her. His eyes met hers when she spoke, and he listened to her suggestions about products as if her opinion mattered. "You run this place yourself?" Cole asked, noting how efficiently. Grace moved through the store and how well she knew where everything was kept. "I help my father," Grace replied, glancing toward the corner where Thomas sat reading. "He built this store 20 years ago." Cole followed her gaze and nodded respectfully toward the older man. "Must be good work, providing for the whole community. Like this takes real dedication." Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. When was the last time someone had spoken about the store with respect instead of criticism? When had anyone acknowledged the hard work it took to keep everything running smoothly? As Cole browsed the shelves, Grace noticed how he moved with quiet confidence. He examined items carefully, asked thoughtful questions about their quality, and treated every purchase as if it mattered. There was something refreshing about serving a customer who appreciated both the products and the service. "This coffee smells wonderful," Cole commented, holding up a small bag of beans. "Hard to find good coffee on the trail." "It comes from a supplier in Denver," Grace explained, pleased that he had noticed. "I try to get the best quality I can for the price." Cole smiled, and Grace realized it was the first genuine smile she had received from a customer in longer than she could remember. "I can tell you put thought into what you stock here. That's rare." As Cole prepared to leave with his purchases, he paused at the counter. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is there anywhere in town where a man might find a decent meal?" "I've been living on trail food for weeks," Grace hesitated. The nearest restaurant was Mrs. Coleman's boarding house, but she knew from experience that Mrs. Coleman would spend more time gossiping about the stranger than serving him good food. "Mrs. Coleman runs the boarding house," she said finally. "But if you're looking for something simple, there's a little cafe next to the post office." Cole thanked her and headed for the door, but then he turned back. "I appreciate your help today, miss. You've been very kind." After he left, Grace found herself thinking about the brief encounter. There had been something different about Cole Sullivan, something that made her feel less invisible than usual. He had spoken to her like she was a person worth knowing, not just someone to take his money and send him on his way. The next morning, Cole returned to the store, and Grace felt her heart skip slightly when she saw him approaching. "How is your horse doing?" she asked as he entered. "Better, thank you. Mr. Peterson thinks she'd be ready to travel by tomorrow afternoon." Cole removed his hat and looked around the store with interest. "I was wondering if you might have any books I could borrow while I wait. It's been a while since I've had time to read." Grace's eyes lit up. Books were her secret pleasure, and she had a small collection that she kept behind the counter. "What do you like to read?" "Most anything," Cole replied. "Adventure stories, history, even poetry if it's well written." Grace retrieved a worn copy of Adventure Tales that she had read countless times. "This one's about exploration in the Western Territories. The author really captures what it's like out there." Cole accepted the book gratefully and flipped through. "A few pages. You've read this?" "Several times," Grace admitted, then worried that she might sound foolish, but Cole's expression showed only interest. "Then you must know if it's accurate. I've been through some of those territories myself." For the next hour, they found themselves deep in conversation about the book, about travel, about the differences between life in small towns and life on the open range. Grace discovered that Cole was not just well-traveled, but well-read, with opinions and insights that challenged her thinking. "You have a good mind for these things," Cole said as their conversation wound down. "Do you get much?" Chance to discuss books with folks around here? Grace shook her head, feeling slightly embarrassed. Most people in Cedar Creek think reading is a waste of time for someone like me. Cole frowned at this. Someone like you? Grace looked down at her hands, suddenly self-conscious. You know, plain, unmarried, without much to offer. The silence that followed made Grace wish she hadn't spoken so honestly. But when she finally looked up, Cole's expression was one of genuine surprise. I don't know who's been telling you that, he said quietly, but they're wrong. Dead wrong. Before Grace could respond, the bell chimed again, and Mrs. Henderson entered with her usual disapproving expression. She took one look at Cole standing close to the counter, engaged in conversation with Grace, and her eyebrows rose in obvious curiosity. Well, Mrs. Henderson said loudly, I see we have a visitor in town. Cole turned politely toward the newcomer, but Grace could see the shift in his posture. The easy warmth of their conversation was replaced by the careful politeness of a man dealing with someone he didn't quite trust. Ma'am, Cole said, touching his hat brim briefly. Mrs. Henderson looked between Cole and Grace with obvious speculation. I hope our Grace here is taking good care of you. Though I'm sure a man like you has places to be. The dismissive tone wasn't lost on Cole, and Grace saw something harden in his eyes. But his voice remained polite as he replied, Actually, I've found Miss Grace to be one of the most helpful and knowledgeable shopkeepers I've encountered in my travels. Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened slightly in surprise. She clearly hadn't expected such a direct compliment, especially not about Grace, as Mrs. Henderson made her purchases with obvious reluctance. Cole caught Grace's eye and gave her a small, encouraging smile. In that moment, Grace realized that someone had finally seen her worth, and it changed something fundamental inside her. What started as a 2-day stop stretched into a week when Cole discovered that his horse needed more rest than expected. Grace found herself looking forward to his daily visits to the store with an anticipation that surprised her. Each morning, she would catch herself checking her reflection in the small mirror behind the counter, smoothing her hair and straightening her dress before he arrived. Cole had developed a routine of stopping by in the morning for coffee and conversation, then returning in the evening to discuss whatever book he was reading. Their talks had evolved from simple pleasantries to deep discussions about life, dreams, and the world beyond Cedar Creek's borders. Tell me about the mountains, Grace said one evening as they sat on the store's front porch, watching the sun set behind the distant peaks. What's it like to wake up surrounded by them? Cole leaned back in his chair, his eyes taking on a faraway look. There's something about mountain mornings that makes you feel small and grateful at the same time. The air is so clean it almost hurts to breathe, and the silence is different from town silence. It's full of possibilities. Grace closed her eyes, trying to imagine such a place. I've never been more than 10 miles from Cedar Creek. Would you want to? Travel? The question caught Grace off guard. No one had ever asked her what she wanted before. I used to dream about it, she admitted softly. Before Papa got sick, before the store became so much work. I used to imagine seeing the ocean or visiting those big cities you read about in books. Cole studied her face in the fading light. What stopped you from dreaming? Grace was quiet for a long moment. I guess I started believing what everyone else said about me. That I was meant for small things, quiet things. That someone like me shouldn't want more than what I had. And what do you believe now? Grace met his eyes, feeling something shift. Inside her chest, I'm not sure anymore. Their friendship deepened with each passing day. Cole began helping around the store without being asked, carrying heavy boxes and reaching items from high shelves. When Grace protested that she couldn't pay him, he just smiled and said that friends helped each other. Besides, he added, you're teaching me more about books than I ever learned in school. I'd say we're even. Grace's father had noticed the change in his daughter's demeanor. She hummed while she worked, smiled more often, and seemed to carry herself with new confidence. When Thomas asked about the cowboy who had been spending so much time at the store, Grace's cheeks flushed pink. He's just a friend, Papa. Someone who actually listens when I talk, Thomas nodded knowingly. Sometimes that's how the best relationships start, my dear, with listening. But not everyone in Cedar Creek was pleased with this developing friendship. The town's gossip mill had been working overtime, and Grace could feel the weight of disapproving stares whenever she walked down the street. "I don't understand what he sees in her," Mrs. Henderson said loudly enough for Grace to hear as she passed the post office. A man like that could have his pick of women in any town. "Maybe he feels sorry for her," replied Mrs. Coleman. "Though I can't imagine why he'd waste so much time on charity." Grace tried to ignore the comments, but they stung more than usual because now she had something precious to lose. For the first time in her life, someone saw value in her, and the thought of losing that connection terrified her. Cole seemed unaware of the town's gossip, or perhaps he simply chose to ignore it. He continued his visits, bringing small gifts like wildflowers he'd picked on his walks or interesting stones he'd found near the creek. "I thought you might like this," he said one morning, presenting her with a smooth piece of quartz that caught the light like captured sunlight. "It reminded me of how your eyes light up when you talk about books." Grace held the stone carefully, amazed that anyone would think her eyes were worth remembering. "It's beautiful." "Thank you." One evening, as they sat reading together in the store after closing time, Thomas's coughing fit was particularly severe. Grace rushed to help him, bringing water and staying by his side until the spell passed. When she returned to the front of the store, she found Cole looking troubled. "How long has he been sick?" Cole asked gently. Grace sank into her chair, suddenly exhausted. "It started last winter, but it's gotten much worse recently. Dr. Wilson says there's not much more he can do." Cole was quiet for a moment, then reached over and took her hand. "I'm sorry, Grace. That must be frightening." The simple gesture of comfort nearly brought tears to her eyes. "I don't know what I'll do when ... She couldn't finish the sentence. "You're stronger than you know," Cole said softly. "I've watched you handle everything that comes your way with grace and dignity. You'll find a way through whatever comes next." As if summoned by their conversation about illness, Dr. Wilson arrived the next morning looking more serious than usual. After examining Thomas, he asked to speak with Grace privately. "I'm afraid your father's condition is declining faster than I hoped," Dr. Wilson said gently. "He has maybe a few months left, and he's going to need more care than you can manage." Alone, Grace felt the room spin slightly. What kind of care? "Medicine that's expensive and someone to watch him during the day when you're working. I know money is tight, but there are decisions you'll need to make." After Dr. Wilson left, Grace sat alone in the store, staring at the pile of bills on the counter. The medicine would cost more than the store made in a good month, and hiring help was impossible. She was trapped between wanting to give her father the best care possible and the reality of their financial situation. Cole found her there an hour later, tears streaming down her face as she tried to make sense of numbers that wouldn't add up to hope. "Grace, what's wrong?" She told him everything, the doctor's prognosis, the impossible costs, the fear that she was failing her father when he needed her most. Cole listened without interrupting, then pulled up a chair beside her. "Let me help," he said simply. Grace shook her head. "I can't ask you to do that. You've already done so much. You're not asking. I'm offering. I have some money saved, and I can stay longer to help with the store. But your job, your life on the road." Cole took her hands in his voice firm but kind. "Grace, you've become more important to me than any job. Let me be here for you." That night, as Grace helped her father prepare for bed, Thomas looked at her with knowing eyes. "That young man cares about you, doesn't he?" Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. "And you care about him too?" "Yes, Papa, but I'm scared. What if he realizes I'm not worth staying for?" Thomas reached for his daughter's hand. "My dear girl, you are worth everything good in this world. If he can't see that, then he's not the man I think he is. But something tells me he sees exactly what I see when I look at you." As Grace lay in bed that night, she thought about Cole's offer to help and his willingness to stay. For the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't facing her problems alone. Someone had chosen to stand beside her, not out of obligation or pity, but because he believed she was worth fighting for. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who would help her discover the strength she never knew she possessed. 2 weeks later, Grace's world changed forever when she found her father peacefully sleeping in his chair one morning, never to wake again. The grief hit her like a physical blow, leaving her struggling to breathe through the pain of losing the one person who had always believed in her. Cole was there within minutes of her tearful call, holding her as she sobbed against his chest. He took care of everything she couldn't manage, the funeral arrangements, the notices to be sent, the countless details that needed attention when someone passed away. "I don't know how to do this without him," Grace whispered as they sat in the empty store the night before the funeral. "He was the only one who ever thought I was worth something." Cole gently lifted her chin so she would look at him. "That's not true anymore, Grace. You're worth everything to me." The funeral was a simple affair, but Grace was surprised by how many people came to pay their respects. Thomas had been well liked in the community, and his death reminded everyone of how much the general store meant to Cedar Creek. As Grace accepted condolences, she noticed how differently people were treating her now, with sympathy, yes, but also with a new kind of respect. "Your father would be proud of how you're handling everything," old Mr. Jenkins told her after the service. "Takes real strength to face loss like this." But Grace's grief was about to be complicated by harsh reality. 3 days after the funeral, Mr. Crawford from the bank arrived at the store with papers in his hand and a regretful expression on his face. "I'm sorry for your loss, Grace," he said, removing his hat. "But I'm afraid we need to discuss the outstanding loan on the store. The payments are 4 months behind, and the bank needs to collect." Grace felt her stomach drop. "How much do I owe?" The number Mr. Crawford quoted was staggering, more than the store could make in 6 months, even with good business. "You have, 2 weeks to bring the account current, or we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings." After Mr. Crawford left, Grace sat alone in the store, staring at the foreclosure notice. Everything her father had built, everything that connected her to her family's memory, was about to be taken away. She felt more alone than she had since her mother died. Cole found her there an hour later, the notice crumpled in her fist. "What happened?" Grace told him about the bank's demand, about the impossible amount of money she needed to find. "I don't know what to do. I can't lose this place, but I can't pay what they're asking either. What if we sold some of the inventory? Or maybe took out a smaller loan?" Grace shook her head. "I already tried that," Mr. Crawford said. "The bank won't extend any more credit, and selling inventory won't bring in enough money fast enough." That's when Cole shared something he had never told anyone in Cedar Creek. "Grace, I wasn't completely honest about why I came to town. I wasn't just passing through, I was running from something." Grace looked up, surprised by his serious tone. "I used to work for a ranch back in Texas. The owner's son took a dislike to me, said I was getting too friendly with the local girls. He spread lies about me, got me fired, and made sure I couldn't find work anywhere in the county." Cole's voice was quiet but steady. "I came out here to start over, but I never stopped moving because I was afraid the lies would catch up with me." "What changed?" Cole smiled sadly. "I met you. For the first time in 2 years, I found a place where I wanted to stay. You made me remember what it felt like to be valued for who I really am, not what someone else said about me." Grace felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. The point is, I know what it's like to be judged unfairly. I know what it's like to have people write you off before they even know you. But I also learned something important. Sometimes you have to fight for what matters, even when everyone else says you can't win." Over the next few days, Cole helped Grace develop a plan to save the store. He had contacts from his travels, ranchers and traders who might be willing to do business with them. Together, they wrote letters to potential customers, offering delivery services and better prices than the competition. "The Morrison Ranch needs supplies for their spring roundup," Cole explained as they worked late into the night. If we can get that contract, it would bring in enough money to make a dent in what you owe. Grace felt a spark of hope for the first time since her father's death. Do you think they'd really do business with us? I worked for them briefly last year. The foreman is a fair man, and he knows good service when he sees it. If we can prove we're reliable, we have a chance. But their efforts were complicated by the continued gossip around town. Some people seemed to think Cole was taking advantage of Grace's grief, while others believed he was wasting his time on a lost cause. That cowboy is filling her head with false hopes, Mrs. Henderson told anyone who would listen. The sooner she accepts that the store is finished, the better off she be. When Grace overheard these comments during a trip to the post office, she felt the familiar shame and self-doubt creeping back in. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was foolish to think she could save her father's store. That evening, she shared her doubts with Cole as they sat on the store's front porch. What if I'm just delaying the inevitable? What if I'm not strong enough to make this work? Cole was quiet for a long moment, then stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Grace? She shook her head. I see someone who has been running a business practically single-handed for months while caring for a sick father. I see someone who knows every customer's name and remembers what they need before they ask for it. I see someone who has been knocked down by life and cruel words, but who gets up every morning and tries again. Cole turned to face her, his expression intense. Most people in this town wouldn't last a week doing what you do every day. They call you plain, but I see someone beautiful inside and out. They say you're weak, but I see strength they can't even imagine. Grace felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening air. You really believe that? I've never believed anything more in my life. The next morning brought their first real test. The letter from Morrison Ranch had arrived, offering them a trial contract for supplies. It wasn't enough to solve all their problems, but it was a start. We did it, Grace said, holding the letter with trembling hands. They're willing to give us a chance. Cole grinned and picked her up, spinning her around the store. This is just the beginning, Grace. You're going to show this whole town what you're really made of. For the first time since her father's death, Grace felt truly hopeful. She had someone who believed in her, someone who saw her potential instead of her limitations. More importantly, she was beginning to believe in herself, the fight to save. The store was far from over, but Grace was no longer fighting alone. She had found her strength in the most unexpected place, in someone who had chosen to stay when everyone else expected him to leave. And in his belief in her, she was discovering the courage to believe in herself. 3 months after her father's funeral, Grace stood behind the counter of her store with a confidence she had never felt before. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating shelves that were fuller than they had been in over a year. The Morrison Ranch contract had been just the beginning. Word had spread about the reliable service and fair prices at Grace's store. Ranchers from 3 counties away now stopped by regularly, and the increased business had allowed her to not only catch up on the bank payments, but also hire young Billy Watson to help with deliveries after school. Miss Grace, Mr. Peterson wants to know if you can get more of that leather oil by next week, Billy announced as he burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement from his bike ride. Tell him I'll have it here by Friday, Grace replied, making a note in the ledger that she now kept with perfect organization. And Billy, remember to slow down on that bike. Mrs. Henderson nearly had a heart attack when you whizzed past her yesterday. Billy grinned sheepishly and headed back out to make his deliveries. Grace watched him go, marveling at how much her world had changed. The store that had once felt like a burden was now thriving, and she had discovered that she actually enjoyed the challenge of running a business. Cole emerged from the back room, carrying a crate of supplies that had arrived on the morning wagon. Over the past few months, he had become her unofficial business partner, using his connections to bring in new customers and helping her negotiate better deals with suppliers. The order from Denver is here, he said, setting the crate on the counter. Including those fancy soaps you ordered for Mrs. Watson, Grace smiled as she examined the shipment. She had learned to read her customers' needs and wants, stocking items that other stores in nearby towns didn't carry. It was a skill her father had taught her, but one she had never fully appreciated until now. "Cole, I've been thinking about something," Grace said as they worked together to unpack the supplies. "The Henderson place is going up for sale next month. What if we bought it and turned it into a boarding house for traveling ranchers?" Cole paused in his work and looked at her with admiration. "That's a brilliant idea. We could offer meals and supplies in one place. But are you sure you're ready for that big of an expansion?" Grace straightened her shoulders, feeling the confidence that had grown stronger each day. "I think it's time I stopped being afraid of taking risks. This town needs more services, and I think I'm the person to provide them." It was a far cry from the timid woman who had hidden behind the counter just months ago. Grace had discovered that she had a head for business, a talent for organization, and the ability to make decisions under pressure. More importantly, she had learned to trust her own judgment. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Henderson swept into the store with her usual dramatic flair, but her expression was different than usual. Instead of her typical disapproval, she looked almost impressed. "Grace, dear, I hear you're considering buying the old Henderson place," she said, her voice carrying a note of respect that Grace had never heard before. "I'm thinking about it," Grace replied carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Well, I think it's a wonderful idea. This town could use a proper boarding house, and if anyone can make it work, it's you. You've certainly proven yourself with this store." Grace blinked in surprise. Mrs. Henderson had never complimented her before. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. I must admit, I underestimated you, dear." "We all did. But watching how you've handled everything these past months, well, it's clear you're made of stronger stuff than any of us realized." After Mrs. Henderson left, Grace stood in stunned silence. Cole, who had witnessed the entire exchange, walked over and put his arm around her shoulders. "Do you realize what just happened?" he asked, grinning broadly. "I think Mrs. Henderson just apologized for years of treating me badly," Grace said, still not quite believing it. "More than that. She acknowledged that you're a force to be reckoned with in this town, and she's right." That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset, Cole brought up a subject they had been carefully avoiding for weeks. "Grace, I need to tell you something. I got a letter from the Morrison Ranch yesterday. They want to offer me a permanent position as their foreman." Grace felt her heart skip a beat. "That's wonderful, Cole. You'd be perfect for that job. It would mean good money and a real future. But there's just one problem." "What's that?" Cole took her hand and turned to face her. "I can't imagine a future that doesn't include you in it. These past months, working alongside you, watching you discover your own strength. Grace, I've fallen in love with you." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too, Cole. I think I have for a while now." "Then marry me," he said. "Simply, let's build something together. The store, the boarding house, whatever dreams you have. I want to be part of all of it." Grace looked at the man who had seen her worth when no one else could, who had stayed by her side through the darkest period of her life, and who had helped her discover that she was capable of so much more than she had ever imagined. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes, I'll marry you." Cole swept her into his arms, spinning her around as he had the day they got the Morrison Ranch contract. But this time it felt like the beginning of everything instead of just a small victory. 6 months later, Grace stood in the same spot where she had once swept the porch and worried about cruel comments from townspeople. Now she was Mrs. Grace Sullivan, co-owner of the most successful general store in the county, and proprietor of Sullivan's Boarding House. The wedding had been a celebration that brought the whole town together. Even those who had once whispered cruel things about her now spoke with pride about how Grace had transformed from a quiet shop girl into one of Cedar Creek's most respected businesswomen. "You know what I love most about our story?" Cole said as they stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "What's that?" "You didn't need me to save you. You just needed someone to believe in you long enough for you to start believing in yourself." Grace smiled, thinking about how true those words were. She had discovered that real strength wasn't about being fearless or perfect. It was about facing your fears, learning from your mistakes, and refusing to let other people's opinions define your worth. Young Billy, now her full-time employee, rode up on his bicycle with the day's receipts from the boarding house. Everything settled for the night. Mrs. Sullivan, the Morrison Ranch crew is comfortable, and they're already talking about making this a regular stop. Grace accepted the ledger with a smile. Thank you, Billy. Lock up when you're done, and don't forget to take some of those cookies from the kitchen for your mother. As Billy rode away, Grace reflected on how much had changed. She was no longer the plain, hopeless woman the townspeople had once pitied. She had become someone who created opportunities, who built things that mattered, and who had earned respect through hard work and determination. Most importantly, she had learned that true beauty and strength came from within, and that the right person would always see and appreciate your real worth. Cole had shown her that she was never plain or worthless. She had always been extraordinary, just waiting for someone with the wisdom to recognize it. Their love story had become the talk of Cedar Creek, not as gossip, but as inspiration. It proved that sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen when someone believes in you enough to help you discover the strength you never knew you had.